Thank you, Neil. That is exciting stuff about IGL, and it does seem applicable too because I'm talking about patience and suffering, this idea of endurance. And I think a lot of the people, the boots on the ground out there in IGL, really exemplify what that looks like to be enduring, to endure suffering. Is this relevant though? Does anyone actually want to talk about patience and suffering? Does anyone struggle with patience? Has anyone suffered at all? Okay, 2 hands. The rest of you, yeah, 2 people raise their hands, 3 hands. Everybody else, just bear with us for a little bit. Last weekend, I went on a work trip to Dallas, and I went with, I don't know if Brian Bassett's here, but Brian Bassett works at the same company as me. And we went, and it was a blast. It was cool. It was really fun hanging out with B. And the way our work handled it was they gave us money for Lyft. They gave us like these Lyft coupons, or that's like Uber, the car share, ride share app thing, so that we can get to the airport, to where the retreat was. If we wanted to go to downtown Dallas or something during the day, we can use like this Lyft coupon to get a Lyft. And it's been a while since I have been in a Lyft or an Uber. I don't know if anyone else has been in one recently, but I'm pretty sure every Lyft or Uber driver views their job actually as like free therapy, because every driver we had just told us about everything that's going wrong in their lives and how miserable they were. The first driver actually, as he's driving us to the airport, was telling us about all of his car accidents that he's been in recently, including one where he totaled his car with a Lyft passenger in the back seat. And it's like, hey, maybe don't share that next time, buddy. Like, I'm sorry for your misfortune that you've been in so many accidents, but I don't know if I need to know that information. The second Lyft we got in started off immediately on the wrong foot, because the first thing she said was yell at Brian for shutting the door too hard. She's like, man, you got a heavy hand there, don't you? And then she just complained about every driver that was on the road. And then she was complaining about everybody coming to Dallas, coming to Texas. All these people from outside of Dallas and outside of Texas coming to Dallas, and they're changing Dallas, and it sucks. Dallas isn't what it used to be. And we're sitting in the back of the car like, that's us. We're not from Dallas or Texas. And Brian was like, well, we're just here for a weekend trip. And she literally says, thank God, that means you're leaving. And then we had another Lyft driver who was talking about, she has 4 kids, and she was talking about her 2 older kids, like 16 and 13 or something like that, and just how bad her kids are. And she should have actually named her daughter Devil, because that's pretty much what she is. She's the devil. And she has these 2 older kids, and she was like, you know what? We're done with kids. I'm going to go get my tubes tied. So she goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, no, you're not. You're 4 months pregnant with twins. I kid you not. Could you imagine finding that out? Holy cow. So then she was just like, the trials of, I got, 4 kids, and there's like a 13-year gap between them, and they're twins, and her husband's a truck driver, so he's not home a lot. When he is home, she does like these Lyft drives. Anyway, it was a great glimpse into how much suffering there is in the world. Like, even just these Lyft drivers are experiencing so much turmoil in their life that they're completely telling random strangers about it. And you know what? I bet if we were Lyft drivers, we would feel compelled to do the same thing, right? We would feel like, you know what? There's just so much suffering going on in my life, I have to talk about it. Because that seems to be the only solution that we have for suffering, is talk about it. Even to people we don't know, we just have to air out our grievances, and we talk about our suffering. James is no stranger to the fact that we all suffer. He's mentioned it and brought up various times the different ways in which we suffer, and the people that he's writing to have suffered. The poor people who have been judged, they've been shown partiality against. The people who have been oppressed at the hands of the rich, getting lashed out at. The people, he's writing to this group of believers who are experiencing persecution as well. But James gives us a new perspective on suffering. And even at the beginning of the book, he says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." James comes with a perspective where he says we can view our suffering, our trials, our misery in a way that is actually pretty edifying, in a way that produces something in us, that produces patience in us. And he picks this idea back up here in chapter 5 and shows us that there is a mature way that as a Christian you can approach the suffering in your life, a way that leads to the transformation of our character. So let's dive into the passage here. "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand." So right out of the gates, I don't know about you, but I feel kind of screwed with this, because the first command that James is giving us in this passage is be patient. Immediately, he's telling us, be patient. I stand up here as someone who is particularly impatient. So when I'm told to just be patient, sometimes I recoil from that. Though over the years, I have tried to figure out how to handle my patience, how to deal with my patience, my impatience rather, I should say. And something that I constantly find myself actually telling myself, and I think this bit of advice is shared amongst other people too, is to be patient, right? I just tell myself, and I tell other people, and we tell each other, just be patient. But that's not really helpful, is it? Because if all I had to do was be patient, then I wouldn't have a problem with patience. If it was just like, Ian, you just got to be patient. Oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? All I have to do is be the thing that I suck at doing. That's so easy. Another question, which I think is a very important question, is why should we be patient? Isn't patience just another way of saying just passively accept the misery in your life? Just grin and bear it. I don't know about you, but that doesn't really sound like a life that I want to live, where I am just grinning and bearing it for my whole life. Yeah, life sucks, but you know what? Just smile, lower your head, and move on. And if you look at the translation of patience, what it actually literally translates to is long suffering. So this isn't short suffering. Patience is not short suffering. When James is talking about this isn't like hey, things will pass in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. No. You're going to suffer for a long time. And he tells us how long we're going to suffer for. Do you see it? When Jesus Christ comes back. That's, for them, a long time. For us, who knows how long. But ultimately, the answer is you're going to suffer for the rest of your life. So you better be patient. But thankfully, James doesn't just leave us hanging. He doesn't just tell us to be patient, but he gives us these illustrations. He gives us reasons, and he ultimately tells us how we can foster this patience in our life. And the first illustration he gives us is that of the farmer. Are there any farmers in here other than the Howells? Ted, do you want to talk about farming real quick? Patience in farming? He does not. Ted has no patience for talking about farming. I'm not a farmer, but I've gardened like my parents always had gardens ever since I got married and got into a house. Even before we lived in a house, we were gardening in our apartment complex. This is our prize zucchini we grew last year, human child for size. It's a very big zucchini. And I mean, we have a big child, so the fact that that zucchini is almost, more than half his size, that's a big zucchini. And you could see my luggage in the background. We just got back from a trip. I don't even know what trip it was, but we got back, went to our garden, and there it was, this huge, massive zucchini. And it took time to grow that. We were gone for a while. Even prior to that, it started as a little zucchini. We grew watermelon last year for the first time ever. That was a blast, and it was delicious. But you see this tiny watermelon, and you can't pick it for months. Gardening takes patience. Farming takes patience. And what I like about this illustration of the farmer is it shows us that patience isn't this inactive, passive lifestyle. There's activity in patience. It's not just, passively watching life pass by, but a farmer, he's weeding, he's pruning, he's fertilizing, he's watering. He's cultivating this garden so that he can bear fruit, so that this garden can bear fruit in the future. That's the same thing that is expected of us as believers, is that we are cultivating something. We are actively working, knowing that the work we are doing will bear fruit in the future and even into eternity. The farmer is also incredibly dependent. He is dependent, it says, on the early and the late rains. The I guess agricultural season in Israel is bookended by these rains. There's the early rains and the late rains. The early rains would come and kind of soften the soil. It's what would give them the ability to even plant their crops to begin with. And then there's a long dry spell. And towards the end of the season, you would get the late rains. And that's what kind of pushes your crops over the last little hump. It's what finally grows them to be mature enough to be picked. So in between those rains, the farmer is working. And he's working diligently, and he's working trustfully. If he just does all of that work and the late rains don't come, he's screwed. He is working dependent. I am working, yet I am still dependent on the late rains. All of this is for nothing without the late rains, yet I trust that it's going to come. Do you see the connection with us? We work trusting that there's something that will come and bear fruit in the future. We are working trusting that Jesus Christ is going to come back someday. Trusting that by the works that we do now will bear fruit in eternity. And knowing that, having that trust, knowing that Jesus Christ is coming back, knowing that he has prepared eternity for us, gives us the ability to be patient now. That fosters patience in us now. He also says to establish your hearts. Some of your translations might say strengthen your hearts. And this is the sense of stability, the sense of endurance. And he is tying this strengthening of our hearts and this patience to the return of the Lord. So if we go back and think about this farmer illustration, right? He plants his crops at the early rains, and then he's working diligently for a while, waiting for the late rains. The farmer with a strengthened heart isn't panicking and freaking out the entire time, right? He has resolve because he has this trust. His heart is strengthened. I trust and I know it's going to happen. And because of that, I don't have to live plagued with, misery and anxiety. Like, is this going to happen? I don't know. Am I going to be screwed here? He trusts. There's this stability, this strengthening of heart. Too often as believers, we live in the opposite, this weakening of heart. And for me, the weakening of heart comes from when I try and do life and ministry by my own power. When I try and do everything by my own, try and, love my wife and kids, try and lead a ministry, try and teach the word and be a faithful steward and do all of the things that we do in ministry by my own power, I end up exhausted. You feel that? Have you been there? That's a good kind of litmus test on where you're at with the Lord, is how exhausted are you by ministry? Now, trust me, ministry is tiring, but there's this sense, this kind of heavy weight that we feel sometimes, this helplessness, this anger, this bitterness, this weakening of heart that comes from when we do things our own way. I love how Isaiah paints this picture in Isaiah 40. Even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. When I taught this to the college group, I tried to forewarn them, you will be tired someday, and it doesn't get any better. One day you wake up tired, and then you're tired the rest of your life. I don't get it. I don't know why, but it's true. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles and shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. It's so funny watching people try and play with my kids, because after about 10 minutes, the sweat starts to form on their brow. and they get weary and they get tired. A friend of mine told me after playing with my kids for a little bit, he was joking, but he's like, I don't know if you know this, but man, kids are exhausting. Like, yeah, man, I get it. I get it. But eventually, someday, my kids will get tired. And actually, if you play with them long enough now, it's a near infinite amount of play. They will get tired. They have to sleep every single night. So everybody experiences this exhaustion. And he also, here in Isaiah, has this illustration of the eagles. And this is a pretty profound, awesome illustration, because the thing that's amazing about eagles is they can fly up to 10,000 feet in the air. That's really freaking high. They get there not by flapping their wings really hard, but by riding these thermal currents that lifts them up to fly at that height. The illustration here, the point here, is how often in ministry are we trying to fly at 10,000 feet and get there by flapping our wings really hard? The point is we can't. When we try and do things our way, we get weary, we get weak. But he says, if you wait on the Lord, he will lift you up to that height. What you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to accomplish, the place you're trying to be, if you try it your own way, you'll be exhausted and you'll have a weakened heart. But if you wait on the Lord, let him strengthen your heart, he'll take you there. And both of these passages here in 7 and 8, he mentions the coming of the Lord is at hand. And I've talked about this a little bit, but this is connected to the idea of patience. The secret to patience and endurance is having an eternal perspective, knowing that things are hard now, but this isn't how it ends. This is why it's fun to do studies on heaven, to read books about heaven. I know a bunch of people are all about Randy Alcorn's book on heaven. Johnny Erickson Tata has a tremendous book on heaven. Hers is so playful. She talks about how she makes heaven plans with people. Other people with disabilities, like, hey, do you want to climb a mountain in heaven? And that gives her that excitement about what she will experience in heaven, gives her patience to endure now. When we suffer, we always ask the question, where's God in this? And that's a question that non-believers frequently ask too. In fact, that's a question that they often point to or use to villainize God, right? If God is so powerful, why does he just let all of this suffering and pain and misery happen? Where are you, God? Why won't you just fix this? And the point is, he will fix this. He is coming. Trust in that. As a believer, trust in that. Trust in the fact that a day will come where there will be no tears. There will be no suffering, no pain, no ailments, and we will live like that for eternity. This life is so tiny in comparison to that. And God also engages in our suffering in the here and now. First of all, through Jesus Christ, who engaged in suffering beyond our comprehension through his death on the cross. But also, God looks at the evil and the pain and the suffering, the misery he sees on this earth, and his heart breaks too. He doesn't want us to experience that. In fact, his heart breaks more than ours. But he is patient. 2 Peter 3, 8 through 9. But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promises, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. The Lord is patient. He will come back and fix things. He will set things right, but he is patient because he is giving more and more people time and an opportunity to know him. And if you're visiting here tonight, this is my message to you, is that God desires to know you. God is patient with you. God knows that you have been suffering. And without God in our lives, suffering has no reason, has no purpose. Without God, we just suffer meaninglessly. We're born, we suffer for 70, 80 years, and then we die, and that's it. No hope to look forward to, no perfection to look forward to. Sure, maybe suffering benefits us in some minuscule way. Yet ultimately, God says, I have something so much more in store for you than just suffering meaninglessly here. And that's a relationship with me. That's eternity with me where there's no suffering. And yeah, you will suffer here now, but it is a blip. It is a drop in the bucket compared to eternity, your time here. And while you're here, you don't have to suffer alone. There's this group of believers, this body of Christ, who is willing to throw in with you, where we can suffer together. We can break bread together. We can have compassion on one another. We can encourage one another. For walking Christians here tonight, we can be patient here because we know that God is coming and we know what he has in store for us. We had our home church frequently will end our teaching with a discussion question, and then we'll break out into small groups and discuss it. And this past Tuesday, the question was something along the lines of like, what are you struggling with in life? What sucks in life right now? It was put a little more eloquently than that. And then we broke up into small groups, and everybody shared about some of their trials that they're going through. And it was interesting that we were doing this in the midst of me working for this teaching, because it helped me understand and recognize that as believers, a lot of us are going through suffering. And there's this common thing that kept coming up is this need for patience in the midst of this suffering. My patience, I'm patient in very select ways. I like running long distances. And I can be patient during the suffering of running long distances because I know that there's going to be a point where the running stops. There's a finish line. In fact, the first half marathon I ran, the last handful of miles were absolutely miserable. But then you get to a point where you can actually literally see the finish line. And I'm like, it's right there. All I have to do is like finish this last mile. And it's the longest. I'm actually pretty sure this mile is a lie. It's actually 5 miles. But you know what? I can see the end and I can endure now. I can run through this now because I see the end. Yet there's things in our lives that seemingly don't have an end. We think about the things that we're enduring and the suffering that we're subjected to. And we lose heart because it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. Have you felt that? There's just going to be no end to my suffering. I'm just going to suffer forever. And James says here, that's not true. There is an end. There is actually a very glorious end. So in my life, when I struggle with patience, my prayers and my cries out to God typically are just like, Lord, give me patience. Lord, give me a supernatural beam of patience straight to my head and heart. And it's this ambiguous desire for patience. And I'm not saying it's wrong to pray and ask for patience, but what I appreciate about James is he is tethering that patience to something that we can look forward to. It's not arbitrary, Lord, I need patience, just give me patience. It's my patience stems from knowing what the future holds, knowing what God has in store for me. Not only from an eternal perspective, but knowing that by enduring the suffering, he is building something in my life and in my heart now. So I'm appreciative of this because when I am struggling with patience, am I having this eternal perspective with the Lord and letting that give me patience? Or am I just expecting that he just delivers his patience straight to my front door? It's nice to know, and it's nice to be challenged by this. I pray that you are too, that we can seek this patience as it connects to the Lord's return and what he is doing in our lives here and now and what he has in store for us in the future. So he has those two examples. This is what the mature response looks like in the face of suffering. You be patient and strengthen your hearts. Here's two examples of what not to do. The immature response. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge, capital J judge, is standing at the door. But all my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Grumbling. Now that I can do. I don't have to ask the Lord for help with grumbling. That just comes naturally to me. And I think it comes natural to many of us. We have a lot of things that we can grumble about. You know, wanting a specific job or a career, wanting a girlfriend, a boyfriend, wanting our spouse to act a certain way. We can grumble and complain about our roommates, our kids, our family. There's no shortage of things that we can grumble about. But the reason we grumble is because we're impatient and we're making demands. I want this to change right now. We aren't considering how our character enters the equation here. So this is an opportunity when we're tempted to grumble. It's an opportunity for us to pause and go in front of the Lord and say, Lord, are you trying to do something here? Are you putting your finger on something? How can my character be transformed through this? We also grumble and are impatient because we don't want to put in the work, right? We want the results without the character that's required to get those results. How often do we see this in dating relationships, right? Well, like, we've been dating for a year, I'm committed in my heart, but engagement and marriage is probably, 3 years away. But you know what? Why wait? So you just throw in together, you sleep together. We want that commitment. We want the fun and joys of marriage without putting in the character transformation that's required of that. And this applies to many areas in our lives where we want the results without the transformation that comes first. We also grumble with other people. That's a common thing. In fact, when we were all talking about the struggles in our life, most often our patience was connected to, like, I need patience for these people in my life. James says patience. Actually, it's interesting if you look kind of behind the curtain of the Greek. The patience is not just like long suffering, and this endurance is not just long suffering, but it's also tied to not retaliating. I am not lashing back. We all know that person that for some reason is particularly gifted at annoying everybody around them. And it's so easy to form this choir of people to complain about this person. Man, I just can't get over how annoying this person is, or what they've done to wrong every single one of us. And we just recount all of these things, all these ways that they have wronged us. The mature response to this is to recognize maybe that person's going through something. I want to move towards that person. I want to step into their life. Instead of joining this choir of complainers, pursue that person in a patient way. I am withholding my desire to retaliate. I am enduring the suffering that's happening in the midst of our relationship so that I can seek reconciliation. Oaths. I don't know how many people are taking oaths these days, but this concept or this idea of letting your yes be yes or your no be no's, being a person who is consistent. Too often when we are going through trials or when we're suffering, we let that weigh on us in such a way that makes us inconsistent people, that makes us wishy-washy. You know what I'm saying? Like the person who is just can't seem to get things together, and they commit to things that they back out of, and they overcomplicate things, and you don't really know if they're actually going to show up. And that's typically a response or an impatient response where I'm not taking stock of things. I'm not really sitting and examining my character. I'm just kind of mindlessly talking. There's also the point here, he talks about these oaths, and we don't really know specifically or historically what James is talking about. But one thing we do know about the audience he's writing to is they were enduring persecution. And how often do we see a situation, or are we in a situation where we're in the midst of persecution or a suffering, and we make these promises to God? God, if you just take this away, I swear I'll never do it again. Or I swear I'll commit my life to you, or I swear I'll submit to you. But we put these, we are scheming our way out of suffering. We're looking for ways to get out of it. We're making these oaths. We're making these promises. And in the midst of suffering, we look for excuses or ways to get out of it. And it's interesting to see that the motivation behind both the mature and immature response is the same. And that's that Jesus Christ is coming. Guys, be patient. Jesus Christ is coming. Guys, don't grumble. Jesus Christ is coming. He makes this connection for both. And it's cool to see the nature of Jesus Christ. We want his mercy. We desire his mercy. Yet, he is just. He is a just God. Jesus Christ is just. But this feels wrong, doesn't it? But recall Matthew 12:36. This is Jesus Christ speaking. I tell you, On the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. And this isn't talking about once you're a believer, you pass out of judgment. It's not like you get saved, but then you say the wrong thing or you offend somebody, and now all of a sudden you're unsaved. And you didn't know it until now you're face to face with Christ, and he says, remember that one time you said a bad thing? Well, guess what, buddy? You're going to hell now. But this is a sobering reality to know that Jesus Christ puts a high amount of weight to the words that we say, to how we communicate with people. James does the same thing. Remember, he's talking about the tongue is a fire. In other words, be careful how you communicate to people, because Jesus Christ is near, the judge is near, and he does recount the things that we do and the things that we say. Yes, we will pass out of eternal judgment, but it's a sobering reality to know that there's a record of what we say. Not so that we can be punished. This isn't about being punished, but recognizing that Jesus Christ is coming. And too often we put off the maturity that I don't want to say are expected to, but we delay our maturity. I'll get to that later. I have this issue, this immaturity in my life, and I'll get to that when I'm done with college, or I'll get to that, when I'm married or when I have kids. And we delay this maturity. But Jesus Christ and James, a lot of what James is writing about is what it looks like to be a mature believer. And the bottom line is we don't know when Jesus Christ is coming back. All I know is Israel's in the news a lot lately. So who knows when he's coming back? Do we want to keep putting off this maturity, this growth that Jesus is calling on us to go through? And it's a rewarding growth. It's not just growth for the sake of growth. He has something better in store for us. And now is the time to act, to let our character be transformed by the Lord. All right, I'm going to go back through two more illustrations. He says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So first he talks about the farmer, but he also gives these other illustrations of the prophets in Job. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the prophets in the Old Testament, frequently we view the prophets, their role as just predictive. We think about things like Daniel 9, where it's this crazy math and these formulas that predict when something is going to happen. But ultimately, the job of the prophets was to bring their people back before the Lord, to call on them to repent and come back to their Creator. That's the job of the prophet. And if you read books like Isaiah or Jeremiah, that's what they're doing. They are like coming before Israel and begging for them to repent and turn back to the Lord. And that's a really hard thing to do. Was it easy for Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, to see his people go through the exile, to be sent, to see them continue to rebel? He's calling on them to come back to the Lord, and they continue to rebel, and they get sent into exile. That's hard. These prophets endured a lot of suffering, yet they didn't back down in the face of this suffering because they knew that they were doing something significant. For us, does the threat of suffering or the fear of suffering prevent us from engaging in meaningful ministry? I've been doing ministry for a couple of years now, 10 so years. Many of you have been doing ministry longer than me. Some of you have only been doing it for a couple of months. But we can all tell you, everyone who's done ministry for any point of time can tell you that ministry is hard. Loving people is hard. Actually, significantly loving and caring about people is challenging. Seeing people walk away from the Lord hurts. If you are interested in doing ministry, you are in the job of getting your heart broken. It's a challenging thing. We've suffered a lot. Yet James gives us this picture of the prophets who endured. It's imperative for us who are doing ministry to endure because, again, we recognize that we are doing significant work here. We can lie down at the first sight of things getting hard, or we can recognize that what we do here has an impact on eternity. And I am willing to endure the suffering because I know the implications and the power and what can come of this ministry and the suffering that we're enduring here. Don't let the fear of suffering get in our way of doing ministry. That comes with not only one another and engaging in relationships here, but with service ministries. It sounds scary to join the hospice service ministry, to see someone else suffer and die, to sit alongside them and suffer. That's scary. To join these Mameos and go into nursing homes, that's scary. Those are uncomfortable things. Don't let our fear of suffering prevent us from doing ministry. Because someone like Job. I talked about Job the last time I taught James, and I didn't know that I would get this passage too that directly talks about Job. And I also don't know how many teachers would be excited to talk about Job multiple times, but here I am, really excited to talk about Job. And that's, I took me and Alex Herbers and Logan Bayless took a seminary class on Job. It was a phenomenal class. And many of you are familiar with Job, so I'm going to speed run Job right now because many of you understand the gist of it. But to catch you up, if you're not, Job was an awesome dude, and I sincerely mean that. In fact, God himself says, talking of Job, that there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. That's pretty high praise from God. I hope God says that about me, that there's no one like me on earth. I am blameless and upright, and I fear God and run away from evil. That's high praise. Yet, due to a cosmic trial that Job isn't even aware about, Satan is given permission to ruin Job's life. His servants are killed. His livestock is burned. All of his children and their families die at the same time. And then he is inflicted with these boils, and his life reaches a point where he is sitting on an ash heap scraping pus from his skin. And then Job's friends enter his life, and they begin this 30-something chapter dialogue, all focused on this one question: why is Job suffering? That's a pretty hefty theological question. Why is Job suffering? And we've asked that question ourselves too, right? Why am I suffering right now? And they talk about this for 30-something chapters, and no one can answer why Job is suffering. That might say, Job, you're suffering because you sinned. And Job says, no, that doesn't make sense. The wicked prosper. Anyway, the end of this, no one has an answer for Job's suffering, and God shows up. And God comes to Job and takes him on this cosmic tour. He shows him the earth and its creation, and how the rains came, and how God set up the boundaries for the waters. And then he starts talking about animals. And he says, Job, have you seen the mountain give birth? Job, can you tame the ox? Job, can you give the horse its strength? And it's pretty wild if you read these speeches from God, because Job is asking the question, why am I suffering? And God says, Job, have you seen the ostrich? It's really funny looking, isn't it? What's the connection here? Why is God talking about this? And would Job not be absolutely floored at this response? God, I'm suffering. My whole family died, and you're telling me about mountain goats. Yet, here is Job's response. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Verse 5, that's got to be one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible. What Job saw is that God is massive, he is powerful, and he is in control. God, I know that I can trust you. I know that you are trustworthy. You control things beyond my comprehension. There are things at play that I don't understand, yet it's nothing to you. And when I know that, I can endure. I know, Lord, that you are trustworthy, and I know that you are doing something here. And the result, this is why I love verse 5. The result is not only patience and endurance, but deepened intimacy with the Lord. Remember what was said about Job. There was no one like Job. Yet after his suffering and his encounter with the Lord, he says, I have only heard about you, but now I see you. Lord, I see you. I have this deepened intimacy with you because I see you face to face now through my suffering. And it says in the James passage, it talks about God's mercy and compassion. And God restored Job. He gave him double everything that he was taken away, not because he was obligated to, but because he is a merciful and compassionate God. So when we avoid suffering, we're robbing ourselves of an opportunity to grow in intimacy with the Lord and have our character transformed. If we want to become patient people, we have to let the Lord walk through us in our suffering. We can't avoid it. And I'm going to end with this real quick, because I just love this. In verse 11, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. And we do, don't we? We look at people like Job. We look at people in our ministry who have been steadfast, and we consider them blessed. And we see how compassionate and merciful the Lord is. And with that, I want to bring someone up to talk about this.
From behind this. Yeah. Because I gotta lay this out. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. There's 1% chance I'm gonna get through this without crying. Advance warning. That's, thank you. Okay. Without a doubt, everyone in this room has suffered. Yeah, many far worse than I have or will. But I've been asked to share with you tonight my experience with suffering, how I've responded, and how the Lord has used it to shape my character. One is I cry a lot more than I used to. So just a little background for those who, by the way, this is unusual for me to cry like this, but so I need to let you know some of my background here. And I had to write this out. I'm going to read it because there's no way I would do this. In January of 2020, COVID sucks. My husband, Keith, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer right before COVID hit, which meant when he was in the hospital, sometimes I couldn't even be there. Or if I went, I couldn't leave or I couldn't go back. So this is a very odd time. Now, this is not the first time that Keith had a life-threatening disease. In 1995, he was diagnosed with hepatitis C. At that time, I was pregnant with Connor, who's now 28. The doctors told us that he'd be lucky to live until 50, and so our prayer at that time was that he'd live long enough to see Connor graduate from high school. But then, a cure was developed, of which Rich also benefited from that, and he was completely healed with very little damage to his liver, which was miraculous. He had gotten it back in his ill-spent youth. So he'd had it for almost 3 decades and very little damage to his liver. It was just, no one could believe it except the Lord. And it was wonderful. And we're like, we're going to get to retire together. And it was just amazing. Yeah, so imagine our surprise when he was diagnosed with, can you guys, am I holding this close enough? When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was kind of like dodging a bullet and then getting hit by a train. And he did amazingly well. He lived for almost 3 years, which he, all the doctors kept saying every 3 months he has 6 months, and then he'd live 6 months, and he kept going for 3 years. Very unusual for pancreatic cancer. But it was in the middle of incredible pain and suffering that he went through. If you knew Keith at that time, you watched him dwindle from about 195 pounds to less than 120 pounds. And a lot of pain and suffering. Pancreatic cancer sucks. But we saw and experienced so much of the Lord's involvement in our life at that time. God allowed him and gave him energy to see the next generation of leaders step up to leadership. Kyle, Adam, Ian, he'd be so proud of you. Zach. All of these guys in the elders meeting. And a slew of next generation leaders. Logan, Jordan, it goes on and on. Nick, Rich, I see all these guys. If I leave out your name, it's only because I can't say them all, which is amazing. We acquired and completed this building, the study center, which I'm sure Corey and Kyle remember the days Keith had input on lighting and so on. It was not that much fun, but it was passion. He got to see that. He got to meet and be involved with 2 of his grandchildren. And he got to see Brian Bassett become a dad. He got to at least complete the ideas for the book he so wanted to write about victorious love. Thanks so much to Heidi Muller for being able to take Keith's narcotic thoughts, literally, and write that book, which you can get in back. Plug. And Keith and I got to spend some sweet spiritual and healing time together. You do acquire damage when you're married. We got to heal that up. We got to say goodbye, enjoy time with our family and our friends. All of these things we prayed for, and the Lord granted it. We also prayed for complete healing, and he answered that prayer too, just not in the way I wanted it at the time. The only reason we could really enjoy some of those times together, and not just endure it, because there's a lot of that, endure, it's because of the reality of a life that continues after death, that we are promised by the Lord. He proved this to us through his own death and resurrection. That's our proof. He said, I did it, so you can do that. And I believe that with all of my heart. He did this so that we could live with him in a better world where love really does reign. Oh, sorry. Where there's no death or suffering, where he will wipe away every tear, thank God. Where we never have to say goodbye, ever, where even the damage and the hurt that we do to each other will be healed completely and forgiven. We clung to that together. There are many things I'm not sure about. The older I get, the more I know I don't know. And the more sin I know I have in my life. So there's a lot I don't know. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life as the fact that our Creator God is a God of love, and that we will be with him and all believers forever. To quote one of my favorite movies, The Sandlot. Keith finally went home to be with Jesus Thanksgiving weekend of 2022. 5 months later, on April 21st, my dad died unexpectedly. Tomorrow is his 1-year anniversary. 2 weeks after that, my mom died, also unexpectedly. In 5 months, I had lost everyone who had actually taken care of me. Now, that doesn't mean people don't care for me or take care of me, but you know what I mean, right? Parents and your husband. A friend of mine at the time said to me, oh, you're both a widow and an orphan. Not one of my more tactful friends. So for these 1.5 years, it's been somewhat of an unrelenting amount of suffering. So here's where the transformation comes in. My usual response to suffering historically has been, how can I fix this? Or how can I manage it? Heidi Kovan is nodding her head like that. Yes. But none of these things could be fixed or managed. I couldn't fix Keith. I couldn't ease his pain or change the course of his disease. I couldn't fix the fact that my parents were gone and I would never speak with them again in this life. And I couldn't make myself feel better. So, as is not surprising for any of you who know me, I became emotionally flat and functionally frenetic. Come see my house. You will see what I have done with the help of Ryan and Corey. In the middle of all that, the Lord has begun to use the suffering to change me. As I began to deal with the reality of what had happened, I finally really began to sit with the Lord. And I mean that literally. I sat in my recliner that belonged to my dad in my bedroom, staring out my new French doors at my birds that are at my feeders, and I sat with the Lord, sometimes saying nothing, just listening, which if you know me is also miraculous. Sometimes talking, also miraculous. Often not making a lot of logical sense. For the first time, that passage in Romans became a real source of comfort, and here it is. In the same way the Spirit helps our weaknesses. For we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches the heart knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that God causes all things to work together for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. You know things, and then you know things. Yeah. What a sweet time this has turned out to be. What a surprise. What a gift. Here's what I'm beginning to learn, what is slowly seeping down into my life. It's going to make me cry more than I already am. The Lord sees me. He sees me. He really sees me. He's sitting with me in my recliner. He's grieving with me. He's giving me hope for the future. And not just my future in the new heavens and the new earth, although I can't wait. But hope in this life. He's made himself known to me, not because I know things about him, and I do, but because he knows me. He loves me. And that has caused me to emotionally love him back. Sorry, I gotta wipe my nose with my shirt. It's so gross. Through this suffering, he has stopped me in my tracks. And if you know me, that's really hard to do. He didn't stop me in my tracks to discipline me, though, but to show me how much he loves me and how much he has for me yet. He gave me real hope. You can't read a book and learn hope. You have to experience it. When Kyle asked me to share this tonight, thank you, Alex, my true friend. When Kyle asked me to share this tonight, and he can't even be here, he asked if I was ready to do that yet. That's a really good question. Because I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm not complete, and I'm not completely healed. But I have discovered that things don't have to be fixed for me to experience joy. This journey with the Lord now is the sweetest thing I've ever experienced. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's around the corner.